You've saved more than you ever have before, and you still feel behind. You check your account balance before you fall asleep, not because something is wrong, just to check. You know the number, you checked it this morning, but something pulls you back at night just to be sure. You've gotten better with money, genuinely better. You spend less on things that don't matter. You have a buffer you didn't have 3 years ago. You've made real progress by any reasonable standard. And yet, the feeling hasn't changed. It's still there, that low, persistent hum, the sense that you're one unexpected bill away from something going wrong, the vague anxiety that follows you into weekends, the one that doesn't move even when the number goes up. Here's the thing, you already know it's not rational. You told yourself that. The math is fine, the accounts are fine, you're fine. But the feeling doesn't respond to math. And somewhere, quietly, privately, you've started to wonder if the problem isn't how much you're saving, but whether saving itself is doing something to you that no one warned you about. Before anything else, I want to say something clearly. You didn't stumble into saving, you engineered it. At some point, you made a decision, maybe after a close call, maybe just through accumulated seriousness, and you built financial discipline into your life in a way that most people never quite manage. You've changed real behavior. You've sustained it. That's not a minor thing. And you're self-aware enough to notice that something doesn't add up, that the relief you were told would come hasn't. That gap is exactly what brings a certain kind of person to a video like this, not someone looking for motivation, someone looking for an accurate explanation. The people who experience this most acutely tend to be precisely that type: analytical, responsible, high-functioning. People who took the advice seriously, executed it well, and then stood there waiting for the promised calm and found the same anxiety they started with, just operating from a more comfortable position. That's not ingratitude. That's not a character flaw. It's a pattern, and it has a specific shape. Once you can see the shape of it clearly, it stops being as confusing, even if the feeling doesn't vanish immediately. So let's look at it directly.
Here's what almost every piece of financial advice gets wrong. It assumes that financial stress is caused by financial insecurity, that if you fix the insecurity, build the savings, eliminate the debt, grow the buffer, the stress will follow it down. Fix the problem, silence the alarm. Simple cause, simple effect. But your nervous system didn't read that logic. Because here's what actually happens when you save consistently. When you transfer money every month because the future feels uncertain. When you build a buffer because bad things can happen. When you plan for disasters because you've seen what happens when people don't. Every single one of those acts carries an implicit message, and your nervous system receives it. The message is, the future is dangerous. Not consciously, you're not sitting there thinking that, but at the level of reflex, at the level of conditioned response, every deliberate act of financial self-protection is also a rehearsal of threat. It's your behavior confirming, month after month, that the danger is real and ongoing, that the vigilance is warranted, that the alarm should stay on. Saving doesn't reduce stress. Saving teaches your nervous system that there's something to be stressed about. And here's the part that's harder to sit with. The more disciplined you became, the more efficiently you reinforced the alarm. You weren't failing at saving, you were succeeding at conditioning. That's the mechanism, and it runs silently beneath every responsible financial decision you make. This is what makes the advice so convincing and so incomplete at the same time. Save more and you will have more. That part is true. But save more while signaling to your own nervous system that the threat is real and you've built a reinforcing loop that no balance can break. The amount in the account grows. The signal your body receives stays the same. Stay ready. Keep watching. Something might be coming. And the strange part is, you would never call it fear. You'd call it being responsible. You'd call it planning ahead, which makes it nearly impossible to see from the inside.
To understand why this keeps running, you have to understand what saving actually trains. Every repeated behavior builds something in the mind over time. It builds an association, a connection between an action and what that action means. And here's what most people miss. Repeated behavior doesn't just create skill, it creates belief. It confirms through action that the action was necessary. When you act to protect against something repeatedly, systematically, month after month, you are not just practicing discipline, you are practicing the belief that protection is required, that the thing you're protecting against is real, that the future, left undefended, will turn against you. This is not a flaw in your character. It is simply how conditioning works. The behavior and the underlying belief strengthen each other. The more consistently you act from fear of financial vulnerability, the more fluent that fear becomes. Not louder, not more obvious, more fluent, more automatic, more invisible. Here's how the loop runs. You feel a flicker of financial anxiety, vague, low level, but present. You respond the way you've trained yourself to respond. You check, you calculate, you transfer something to savings. The action briefly satisfies the anxiety. You feel for a moment that you've done something about it. And then the anxiety returns because the action didn't resolve anything. It just temporarily quieted the alarm. And by quieting it that way, you confirmed that the alarm was right to go off. The next month, you save again. The month after, you increase the buffer. You set a new target. The target gets reached, and instead of relief, there's a brief moment of recalibration because arriving at the goal exposes the fact that the anxiety didn't leave with it. So the goal moves, and the saving continues. And the deeper problem is this. The more consistently you do it, the more your nervous system learns that safety requires constant effort, that calm is not a natural state to return to, it's something that has to be actively maintained through action and vigilance. Which means the moment you stop monitoring, the moment you ease the effort even slightly, it doesn't feel like rest, it feels like exposure. Your savings grew. Your fear got more efficient. Those two things happened at the same time in the same account, and almost no one talks about that. This is where saving becomes its own kind of trap, not because saving is wrong, but because for someone already running a high degree of financial alertness, saving is not calming the system, it's feeding it. Every deposit says, yes, this is what survival looks like. Every buffer says, yes, the thing you feared was real. And the system takes note and stays ready and waits.
This isn't abstract. It shows up in very specific, very ordinary moments. There's the Sunday evening ritual where you sit down with your accounts, your spreadsheets, your budget app, and you go through everything. Not because something changed, not because there's a decision to make, just because it's Sunday and the week is coming and you need to see where things stand before you can feel ready for it. You don't call it anxiety management, you call it being organized, and it is organized, but the organization is serving something else.
Because the ritual isn't really about information. You already have the information. It's about the act of checking, the movement of reviewing, confirming, scanning. That motion briefly quiets the system, and so the system learns to want it. Not weekly, soon daily, eventually multiple times a day. Not because the numbers change that often, because the relief is that short. Then there's the way you respond to any unexpected expense, no matter how manageable. The car needs a repair. It's within budget. You have the money. Logically, this is exactly what a buffer is for. This is the scenario you saved for. But the afternoon you find out something closes over the day. A specific low-grade dread settles in, disproportionate to the actual disruption. And if you pay attention to what's happening, the buffer did its job, the money handled it, but your nervous system didn't read it that way. Your nervous system read it as confirmation. Things can go wrong, unexpectedly, at any time. Good thing you were watching. The expense resolves, the anxiety doesn't. In fact, you save a little more that month, almost automatically, because the unexpected expense reminded you what could happen, and the saving is the response. Here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. Think about the last time you increased your savings, put more away, raised the buffer, hit a new target. In that moment, did you feel like you could relax a little? Or did you immediately begin thinking about what could threaten it? Take a moment with that, not to answer out loud, just to notice what actually happened. Because for a lot of people, the honest answer is that the arrival at the target wasn't an arrival at all. It was a brief plateau before the mind moved to the next elevation. And that movement felt completely reasonable, responsible even. But it also meant the target was never really about the target. It was about managing a feeling that the target couldn't touch. The third manifestation is subtler. It's in the quality of thought itself, in what happens when you're not actively managing anything. The financial scenario building that happens without invitation. Not when you sit down to plan, but when you're in the shower, on a drive, half asleep. The mental modeling of what happens if the car needs major work, or income changes, or the market drops by 30%. You're not doing this deliberately. The system is running contingencies on its own, rehearsing, making sure you're not caught off guard. And this thinking is sophisticated. It draws on real information, real pattern recognition, real intelligence, which makes it easy to mistake for careful planning. But careful planning has a beginning and an end. This doesn't end. It pauses and resumes and pauses again. And the resuming is automatic, triggered not by new information, but by the background anxiety reaching a threshold the system decides needs addressing. This is the cognitive version of the same loop, thinking deployed as protection, planning as rehearsal of threat. And the more intelligent you are, the more elaborate the rehearsal becomes. The more scenarios you can model, the more scenarios the system will generate for you to model. Your intelligence doesn't escape this pattern. In some ways, it makes it more convincing.
This is the part that's hardest to see, because it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive as a crisis. It doesn't feel like a breakdown. It settles in so gradually that it stops registering as something happening to you and starts feeling like simply how you are. And here is what it costs over years, without drama. You become excellent at building safety, but incapable of experiencing it. You built a larger buffer and a more sophisticated threat response. Both grew. Only one of them shows up on a balance sheet. That's not an exaggeration. That's the specific shape of what happens when the loop runs long enough. The skill gets sharper, the discipline more refined, the systems more efficient, and the felt sense of security gets more distant. Not less, more distant. Because the better you get at protecting against threat, the fluent the vigilance becomes. And fluent vigilance is invisible vigilance. It just feels like how you think about money. The good months pass without being registered as good. The years you hit every target feel less like success and more like not having failed. The financial security that exists on paper, the security that is genuinely real, that you earned, that represents years of discipline, you live adjacent to it rather than inside it. And the cost extends into time itself. The future should, at some point, become something to move toward with some degree of openness, a time when the effort converts into felt freedom. But for someone running this loop, the future is primarily a surface covered with scenarios, not something anticipated, something defended against continuously in advance. What gets lost in that orientation is difficult to name precisely, but easy to recognize by its absence. A certain ease, a looseness in how you move through days that aren't financially complicated. The capacity to have a good week without something underneath keeping track of when it ends. 5 years of this feels like carrying something you can't put down. 10 years, and you've mostly stopped noticing the weight, not because it's gone, because it became you. And the thing you were saving toward, the peace, the ease, the ability to simply live without the background alarm, keeps deferring to some future point that the conditioning never quite allows you to reach. This is what the pattern costs. Not a dramatic loss, a slow replacement of actual security with the endless performance of pursuing it.
I want to offer you some statements, not to answer out loud, just to notice what happens internally when you read them. When you make a transfer to savings, does the relief last through the day, or does the next concern arrive quickly to fill the space? When you hit a savings target you set for yourself, do you feel like you've arrived somewhere, or does a new number appear almost immediately? When you try to think about money less, does the quiet feel like rest, or does it feel like you're not paying enough attention? When an unexpected expense arises and you handle it without financial strain, does your body register it as proof that the system worked, or does it register it as a reminder that things can go wrong? When you imagine the future you've been saving toward, do you picture ease, or do you picture a different set of numbers to protect? These aren't designed to produce a particular answer. They're designed to create a small gap between the response you'd give if someone asked you out loud and the response that's actually true when you sit with it quietly. Because the pattern doesn't feel like anxiety from the inside. It feels like attentiveness. It feels like the appropriate level of care for someone in your situation, with your responsibilities, who has seen what happens when people aren't careful. And that framing, that story, makes it nearly impossible to see. Attentiveness looks like virtue. Discipline looks like strength. Planning looks like wisdom. Sometimes those things are exactly what they appear to be, but sometimes they're the costume that conditioning wears when it's been running so long it's forgotten it was ever a response to something, when it stopped being a reaction to a real threat and became the default mode of operating, the water you swim in, invisible precisely because it's everywhere. The question isn't whether the behaviors are good or bad. The question is what they're serving, whether they're producing calm or just briefly interrupting anxiety before it resumes. That's the only distinction that matters here. Here's something that doesn't get said enough. Seeing the pattern isn't the same as being trapped by it. What the loop depends on more than any particular behavior is invisibility. When it operates below awareness, it directs your attention, shapes your emotions, and scripts your decisions without interference. The checking feels rational, the planning feels responsible, the saving feels like the right thing to do, because you can't see that what's driving all of it is a nervous system that learned somewhere along the way that the future is a place to be defended against. When you can see it, when you can name what's actually happening while it's happening, something changes. Not the circumstance, not immediately the feeling, but the relationship between you and the feeling. When you find yourself opening your banking app for the third time in an afternoon, you don't have to stop, but you can notice this is the loop. This is the system looking for a signal it won't find in the balance. That small moment of distance, that brief observation without judgment is not nothing. It interrupts the automaticity. It inserts a pause between the impulse and the action, and in that pause, something different becomes possible. When you put money away and feel the brief relief followed immediately by the quiet recalibration toward a new target, you can notice the savings grew, and the system updated its threat level without consulting you. Those are two separate things, and seeing them as separate is different from living inside them as one. This is not about stopping. It's not about deciding to care less. It's not about dismantling the discipline that got you here. It's about being able to see with some clarity what the discipline is in service of, whether it's producing the life it was supposed to protect or just continuously protecting itself. You don't need to answer that today, but you do need to be able to see the question.
The money was never going to do the thing you needed it to do. Not because it doesn't matter, it does. A real buffer makes real things possible. Progress is real. The discipline is real. But here's the distinction that almost never gets made. There's a version of saving that comes from stability, where the behavior is grounded, deliberate, proportionate, and then done, where the deposit is made and the attention moves on because the system isn't running on alarm, where the future is something to build toward, not something to defend against. And there's a version of saving that comes from fear, where the behavior is driven by a nervous system that reads the future as dangerous and treats every protective action as confirmation that the danger is real, where saving doesn't quiet anything, it feeds it. From the outside, both versions look identical. From the inside, only one of them ever gets to feel like enough. You already knew something was off. You felt the gap between what the numbers said and what your body kept insisting. The question worth sitting with, not answering, just sitting with, is which version you've been running. Not to judge it, just to see it. That's enough for now. If something in this landed, leave a comment. Not about what you're going to do differently, just what you recognized.